to this week's. I'm your host for this week, Jen Allen Knuth. We've got Will Aiken behind the scenes. And for this week, we have an extra special guest and a really, really fun topic that I think in preparing for this show got me thinking completely differently about how we use humor in emails. So before we bring him out, our guest today is Chris Bogue. You've probably seen him on LinkedIn. If you haven't, we're going to play a quick video that he made actually to promote this episode today. But for those of you that don't know him, he is a Second City all-star coach that helps people bring out their creativity in their content creation and in their sales approaches. So let's take a look at the video.
Stop what you're doing right now. I am going to be on Lavender Live this week. Why? Because I'm the only man on earth who has written not one, not two, but 4 comedy sketches, each starring a different team member from the company Lavender.
Bogue, get the f*** into my office right now.
We're all great friends.
You dirty you slimy little slug. I'm gonna break your dog in half.
Everybody there loves me. Jen Allen will be interviewing me.
Welcome to Dark Social.
She's just a really normal, down-to-earth person.
Dark Social is the god-forsaken realm where nothing is tracked and anything is possible.
It looks pretty crazy from the outside, but comedy is a simple formula.
Come on, seriously, stop it. What are you doing? Stop it. Stop it. Stop it.
We will be discussing some simple comedy frameworks and principles that you can incorporate into your email writing for sales.
What if instead of spending all day sending 300 emails, you took an hour and we actually learned how to write a good email?
That's just crazy enough to work. You can find the RSVP link right here in the comments. That's Wednesday, June 28th at 11 a.m. Central on LinkedIn Live.
Don't miss it.
Don't miss it.
Don't miss it. Or miss it. Whatever.
It's going to be a terrible episode.
Thank you, Todd. All right, let's bring him out. Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, now we always do this in the beginning of the episode. What is the one thing you think sellers often get wrong about using comedy or humor in sales emails that kind of shapes your point of view on this topic?
They tell jokes, and I'm actually this might shock your audience, but I actually say don't tell jokes. And when a company brings me in to teach them improv, the first thing I do, and I'm gonna make you do this with me right now, Jen. Take a deep breath in. Now breathe out the need to be funny. And I tell them, when people try to be funny, they aren't. If you sit around and try to think of the funniest joke you can come up with, it's probably not going to be funny. Comedy is the truth, and I'm an improviser. As you mentioned, I was trained at Chicago's Second City. And, I've got a bunch of different frameworks I use here for comedy writing, but it always starts with the truth. The truth is funnier than fiction. If you're going out there and trying to tell jokes, you're probably starting off on a bad foot. Start by telling the truth, and the truth is what's funny.
Okay, so the first thing that comes to mind when you say this, and we've probably all seen that email, is that horrendous breakup email that's like, have you been, stolen by Bigfoot? I think that's a perfect example of trying to use humor, forcing it, and kind of missing the point. So if you've tuned into the show before, you know that we do our best to make these episodes highly, highly actionable. So we're actually going to spend the remainder of our time picking Chris's brain. I hate saying that, but I just said it. Picking Chris's brain on how he actually takes some of the comedy and improv frameworks that he learned and uses them in an unexpected way in sales emails. So get your pens and paper out if you still use it. Get your keyboards out if that's how you take notes, because he's going to break down some things that I frankly had never heard of that I think will really sharpen up your sales email. So he's got 10 of them. We're going to see how many we can get through today. If we don't get through all of them, we'll do a little fun call to action at the end. But Chris, why don't you kick us off? What's your first and favorite one?
So the first one is the building block of improv. It is the golden rule, is the only rule you need if you're doing an improv scene, and that rule is called yes and. Yes, comma, and. So yes and is the foundation of everything I do. It is the foundation of every improv scene I've ever in. We can get into this. Yes and is actually how I met Jen Allen. But yes and is the framework I use in all my sales communications. And the idea behind yes and is in an improv scene, you are making up the reality as you go. You are literally starting with a blank stage. And you need to create a relationship and you need to create meaning and a situation out of nothing. So the only thing you can rely on is the other people in the scene. And that means everything they say, you need to accept as the truth. It's the only rule is you cannot deny your partner. If they said something, it is now real. And something I was taught in improv is, you have to operate under the principle that your partner is a genius and everything they say is a gift. The way they're standing, what they're doing on stage, the tone of voice, every single thing they're giving you is a gift, and your job is to say yes. And then the and part is you have to take it one step further. It's not enough to agree with them. You have to make a move to drive the relationship forward. And I yes and all the time. It is, if I'm ever in a show, if Tina Fey and Will Ferrell show up in the improv set and they just jump onto stage, I am 100% confident playing with them because we're all operating under that same rule. I know they're not going to just shoot me down and make me look stupid. I know if I make a strong move, they are going to yes and me. And that's what I start with the sales emails, right? And Lavender does this. Lavender starts with an observation in your email writing framework, but it's the same idea. You're letting the other person make the first move, and your email is a reaction to something that they know is real. And when you start with that, when you start by acknowledging the thing that is real and you build one step further onto that, not everybody is going to take that next move with you. But if they do, you've just established a shared framework of reality. And now you're having this communication where you are equals together. So yeah, you can yes and anybody. It works on everybody. It's a very democratizing approach to collaborative storytelling. And that is where I start basically everything I do, whether it's sales or content creation. It's always yes anding.
Okay, so let's say I'm an SDR or an AE. What's one place where you would recommend we go to grab that observation or to start that yes and choreography?
Ton of them. LinkedIn is a great place. Social media is a great place. Honestly, the company's value statements on their website, marketing exists for a reason. Like, companies pay a lot of money for marketing. They want to be noticed that way, right? Marketing is like how you want people to perceive your brand. So if you just start by noticing them the way they want to be noticed, that is yes-anding them. And an example here is I did not know Jen Allen Knuth, but I saw her on a live stream once, and I thought she was very entertaining. And the first message I sent wasn't, "I'm Chris Bogue, I'm so funny, here's a joke, hope you laugh at it." It was, "Oh my gosh, I saw you on that show. That was such an interesting thing you did." And yeah, I am more like and with emails, if I can find something that they've said, if I literally can take the words out of their mouth, that's often my subject line. Because they look at it, and again, it's not me trying to be like, "Look at me, I'm so funny." It's somebody listened to them, somebody heard them. Maybe this person understands me, is what they're gonna think. And I have this belief where, like, theater, the performer is up here and the audience is down here. That's not what improv is, and that's not what sales is. You want to be eye to eye with your audience. In improv, the audience is part of the show. You are going to them for suggestions. You're pulling them on stage sometimes. And yeah, sales should never be starting with a joke. You risk either putting yourself down here where you're like, oh, please pay attention to me. Oh, please look, I'm performing for you. Or if you're too cocky or too smarmy or whatever, you're going to be up here talking down to your audience. When you yes and them based on the thing that is important to them, you are starting the relationship eye to eye as equals. And that's how I want to start every sales interaction.
So you made a point, and we talked about this before the show, that I think is so, so cool, which is it is arguably this yes and approach is one of the best ways that you can demonstrate active listening. Right. So can you just touch on that a bit? I know you mentioned it briefly, but I think that's a really, really cool point that I think we overlook with this approach.
Yeah. So there's actually a technique I wrote down on here called the Marty, which is super obscure. I don't even know if anybody's ever written about it, but one of my improv teachers would play this game, and it's a deep listening game. And all it is you have two people doing a scene, and you have a moderator who stops the scene periodically, and they will just stop the scene and be like, Chris, what did Jen just say? And it sounds like that would be the easiest thing on earth to answer. But oftentimes what people do is they are sitting thinking about how they're going to say the next funny thing or the next intelligent thing or the next interesting thing. They've got their talking point that they want to insert into the conversation, and they are waiting for the opportunity to throw it in there. And when you do that, you're going to miss game moves. My teacher would do this with his hand. If anybody is listening to the audio version, I'm doing like the little phone thing where I'm sticking out my pinky and my thumb, and he would grab onto his pinky and he'd say, this is the first half of the sentence. This is the second half of the sentence. Too often people will stop listening once they hear the thing they were waiting to hear. But the important part of the sentence was here in the end of the sentence, and they completely missed it. And you'll see this in an improv scene where somebody will hear something and they'll go off on a tangent or whatever, and they missed that the person also mentioned that they are an assassin. If someone's like, by the way, I'm an assassin, that changes the entire scene, but an improviser will miss things if they aren't listening intently. So yeah, everything your prospect says is a gift. And this is why I recommend, I take a lot of notes by hand. And, if I'm running a presentation and I can reference something 20 minutes in and say, Jen, earlier you mentioned this thing. That's great because we actually have a solution for that. That really sticks out, and for improv, a lot of the jokes are rooted in what we call specifics, right? Just shoot, like you never want to go into an improv scene and just like say like, I'll have a drink. Right? That is not specific enough. If you go out there and say, hey, I'll have a PBR tall boy, or hey, I'll have a cranberry martini, give me a Johnny Walker Blue, neat. Those are three wildly different, like you will make inferences about that person based on the specific words they use. And yeah, if somebody mentions to me that they had a cranberry martini and I send them an email with the subject line cranberry martini, that's going to mean something to them. I was really listening and I really remembered them.
It's interesting because last week we had Jason Bay on and he was talking about the importance of specificity as well. And we're all big fans of Riley Blaisdell here. I think you know him too. One of the really cool things that Riley does when he reaches out to senior leaders or people that he has have really large followings is he'll state a line that's like really deep into an episode that he heard them on. And as someone who's been on the receiving end of that, it's like, this isn't someone saying, hey, I heard you on this podcast. It was good. Now let me tell you about what I wanted to tell you about. It shows, to your exact point, the specificity of is like, this is someone who is listening and paying attention. It's such an easy way for us to stand out. So I think that's just such a killer point about listening. Cool. Let's move to the next one. What you got next for us?
Yeah, so this will be so we can kind of transition there from so I want to talk about the 3-line scene. So this is where the term vague man comes from. Anybody who's ever seen my comedy, I have a character named Vague Man. It's me in a cape in front of a blurry background, and the game is I just say vague things. Like, he never says anything specific ever. And Vague Man actually came about as a thing that when I was learning improv, they would scream at us if you didn't establish who you are, where you are, and what your relationship is to each other within the first 3 lines of a scene. If you're just kind of like vaguely talking about whatever, somebody would stop the scene and they'd go, "Hey, Vague Man, where are you? What are you doing? Why does anyone care about this?" And yeah, specificity comes in here too. And that's why, again, if you're sitting there with a drink, who are you? Nobody knows who you are. But 20 minutes later into the scene, if I sit down in the bar and say, another cranberry martini, please, they're like, oh, it's that guy who was doing the cranberry martini thing earlier. So with the specificity, just dropping one specific line can establish all those things immediately. And, there's like, you'll see like rookie improvisers do this thing where like they go out of their way to explain the relationship, and they'll be like, well, Jen, we've been brother and sister for what, 17 years now, and because we're doing blah blah blah. It's like, no, skip past the exposition, and if you start with something that's very specific that will resonate with them, you've already given them the context to know that you're a person worth listening to. And, for an improv scene, that might be as simple as me starting out by saying, scalpel? Okay, you can guess I'm probably a surgeon.
Oh, yeah.
And the person I'm working with is probably my assistant, I just gave you the relationship, the what are we doing, the location with one word, right? With sales, maybe this is something in their tech stack. I'm a video prospecting coach, and if I know that they just adopted a platform like SendSpark or BombBomb or Vidyard or whatever, that could be the first thing I mention, because I see on LinkedIn that their team is posting about it. The fact that I know this thing is real, I know they just paid for it, I know their team is using it, I know they just launched it out. If I can speak to that and their values and set myself up as someone who might be able to help them just get ramped up on that faster, I could get a meeting out of that, but it's not by starting by saying, I'm Chris Bogue, boop, boop, boo. I'm the best video prospecting coach on earth. I'm going to 10X, your revenue by X and Y and Z. It's like, hey, I noticed you did this, and I think this is like, whatever, like this, like I see your team is really excited about this. Like, here's some of the potential problems that can happen if you don't use it, if you don't utilize it. And like, yeah, let me know if you'd be open to a conversation about that. I didn't have to explain I'm a video prospecting coach, because I'm just talking to them directly about the situation that is real for them today.
This is probably one of the best tactics I've heard to apply to cold email, because when you look at cold email on average, if you get a lot of them, there is so much over explanation, right? It's like oftentimes your signature provides more explanation than is necessary than just writing a paragraph and sermon of who you are and what you do. And so I love how you talk about taking that context setting and letting the email body and even the subject line, as you hinted in the last question, tell a bit of the story itself. We don't have to make these necessarily like independent pieces in constructing an email. And we know on average, we've got about 9 seconds when someone opens an email. So if there's like one big thing we take away from it, this is probably one of my favorite things I've heard you talk about, just because we know that one of the biggest barriers is just length in email. It's a fabulous way to get after it.
Yeah. And you need to have a plan for what you're going to do if they don't read the full email. Just like you need a plan for what they're going to do if they don't watch your entire video content. If anybody like looks deeply into my stuff, I am always telling these little micro stories. Like my tagline on LinkedIn is mercifully short video content that drives revenue. right? If that's the only thing you take away, I got my point across. Even if you only take away the first 2 words, mercifully short, that's pretty good. My podcast is called Chris Sells His Soul. That's a little story in and of itself. It's kind of funny, kind of subversive. It gives you a little bit of the context for what you need to know. And yeah, if I send you an email because you just like adopted Vidyard, like maybe you didn't read the whole thing, but when I call up, it's like, oh, this is the guy that was talking to me about video prospecting because we just adopted this video solution. Like I got my point across to you and you didn't even read the whole thing, and that's what sellers need to be thinking about. And also job seekers too, is like, your email, your message to them is such an insignificant part of their day. Like, how can you tell that story in as few words as possible? And that always starts with find something specifically meaningful to the buyer.
I'm eating this up. I love it. Okay, next one. Let's keep it moving. We got about 9 minutes left, so we'll see how far we can get.
Let's actually talk about joke structure then. So,
Okay.
2 things we're going to talk here. We're going to talk about setup, punchline, and the rule of 3s. So, setup, punchline is like the basic formula to stand-up comedy. We've been talking this whole time about improv and supporting your partner and listening to your partner. Stand-up is a much more self-serving thing. And setup and punchline, you're setting up an idea and then you're giving them the payoff. And if you're doing a good job writing jokes, you want to put as little space as possible between the setup and the punchline. So an example, Mitch Hedberg, the late Mitch Hedberg, great legendary comedian. All he did was one-liners. And his jokes were something like, he'd be like, I used to do drugs. I mean, I still do drugs, but I used to too. You set up the expectations and then you give them something a little bit different than what they expected. And
love this.
There's also the rule of 3s here, which we can get into more. There is something funny about doing things in multiples of 3. And I think I know what it is. So the first thing you throw out there is establishing an idea. Second thing establishes a pattern. And then the third thing subverts the pattern. And if anybody wants to write a joke in an email, this is an easy way to do it. Give them a list of 3 things. Here's one normal thing. Here's a second normal thing. Here's the joke. For some reason, that is, and you can notice this with all the jokes you listen to. They almost always come in 3s. If you've got a list that's longer than 3, do it in multiples of 3. Make it a list of 6 or a list of 9 or a list of 21. For some reason, that 3 is the sweet spot. And again, I'll use Mitch Hedberg, one of his jokes, as an example. He's like, you ever notice how, like, with a stop sign, he's like, ever notice with a stop sign, green means go, yellow means wait, and red means stop. But with a banana, it's just the opposite, right? Green means wait, yellow means go, and red means where the F did you get that banana at? And again, you're sitting there and it's like thing 1, thing 2, you're waiting for it. And then they give you something that maybe you could have thought of, but you didn't, So yeah, if you're ever writing a joke or if you ever want to surprise your audience, keep in mind that rule of 3s. If it's a list of 2, try to make it into a third one. For some reason, that third one always hits harder. And it's just again, these are things where like I'll do comedy sketches with people. And I'll just admit this to you now, Jen. You saw a supercut of like sketches I've done with the Lavender people. There's so many times where someone's going to be on my show and I'm like, oh yeah, we'll just do a scene. You'll put on a goth thing and we'll go out there and we'll go boo, 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 and everyone will love it. And then I have to sit down and I'm like, oh my God, I don't actually have anything, But then all the rules, I just rely on the rules and it becomes funny, I try to think like, how would I really react in this situation? Your boss, Will Allred, we did this joke where it was like the end of Q2 and, or it was the end of Q4 and I'm running around like scrambling because I don't have time to do anything. And I'm pretty sure the script just said Boss Bogue runs around in a panic. But I had to find 3 different things, whereas like, okay, first I'm going to go into the bathroom. I put the toothpaste on the toothbrush. I go to brush my teeth and I go, I don't have time to brush my teeth. It's the end of Q4. Then I run to the coffee machine and I'm like in a panic, like putting in the coffee, turning it on, brewing it. I'm sitting there like gritted teeth as it's brewing. I put in the milk, I put in the sugar, I put in the coffee, I stir it around. I go, I don't have time to drink coffee. It's the end of Q4. And then it escalates. Then there's a third one. All of a sudden you see me on the phone. Someone calls me and it's a prospect. And he's like, oh, hey, just about to sign the DocuSign right now. Just got a couple things we got to iron out first. And I'm like, I don't have time to close deals. It's the end of Q4, And then Will calls me up and now he's going to come on the show to teach me how to write an email. But again, it was like, how can I make this funny? Okay, well, I'm going to do 3 things. And they're going to be normal household things, but I'm going to react to them like a panicked sales manager would, And again, it's like, it's so absurd when you look at it, but I'm like screaming at my coffee pot at one point, being like, there are 20 selling days remaining in the year. You make 1 pot of coffee a day. Pick up the pace. I don't have time for this. It's the end of Q4, and the audience laughs because it's true. That is the same thing that their boss is yelling at them is oftentimes completely ridiculous, and they are skipping the very important things that they need to do. And me screaming it at my coffee pot just kind of like, heightens it. But again, people don't actually remember that. It's not like a specific line where they're like, oh, I remember when Chris said da-da-da, that was so funny. They're remembering the situation and they're remembering the vibe. And even people threw in the comments here, they're like, oh, when's Goth Jen gonna come out? That's what they remember. They remember that moment. They don't necessarily remember the things that we were saying. And, I guess I'll throw this one last one out here because I know we're at the end of our time. But the last piece of writing advice I will give you is kill your darlings. When I would write sketches at Chicago's Second City, they would be like 90 to 120 minutes long with a full cast of actors and a band. And my writing partner and I would always write twice as many sketches as we needed because we would have to like hash it out and cut half of them out of the show and make sure that the stuff that went on stage was the very best that we had. And in email, this means you're going to have to do a lot more than you think. You are going to have to experiment all the time. And just because you really liked it doesn't mean that that's what's going to resonate with your audience. And at the end of the day, it is about them. You have to connect with them on their terms. So yeah, write too many, try a lot of different things, and then go with what landed.
Okay, so I think my favorite takeaway from the show, and there are a lot of them, and I'm not just gassing you up. This is such a cool way to think about sales emails, is Mitch Hedberg. I have never, ever thought about mirroring or learning from Mitch Hedberg's style, but you're right. He tells a complete story in usually 1 or 2 sentences. And I see we've got some Mitch fans in the comments who are dropping some really, really good comments in here. I love that idea because I think it speaks to brevity. I think it speaks to making that connection. I think it speaks to what you talked about in the beginning and then just now about laughing at things that are honest, right? Not trying to make a joke, but actually just making an observation. I think in many ways, that's what we tried to do with the Lavender Joe character. We've all been Lavender Joe at some point in our sales careers. And so finding humor and exaggerating it is such a clever way to think about it. Not just for sales also. You've got me now thinking how relevant this is for marketing and how we can probably do a much better job of storytelling.
Yeah. And, I guess one last thought I'll tack onto that is like, I try to not assume the way my audience is going to feel. And when I was a younger man, I used a lot of self-deprecating humor. And I found that sometimes didn't serve my purposes. Sometimes I would be making myself look smaller and more insignificant than I needed to be. And I would be getting people to think negative thoughts about me. So I don't go in there. I never want to make myself like, oh, I'm so undeserving of your time, because maybe they're not. Maybe they think it's like what I'm selling is really valuable. And I don't go in there assuming that they don't like sales or they don't like cold calls or they don't like LinkedIn or whatever, because maybe they do, you know? Yeah, you again, it's like you gotta establish that shared framework of truth, and then you could say pretty much anything. Just keep it honest.
Okay, so I could have gone another hour with you. We obviously didn't get through all 10 frameworks. So for those of you that are still with us, if you want to hear the ones we didn't get to today, go ahead and tag Chris Bogue, Bogue, in the comments, and Chris will follow up to get you the rest and probably have a really good conversation about it. I would totally encourage you to do it. Chris is always changing our thinking here. We are huge Chris fans here at Lavender. So before we let you go, now that you've sparked all this interest, where can people learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so there is a QR code on the screen. I am doing an event next week. I have a live stream and a podcast called Chris Sells His Soul. As you've seen, I've had a lot of Lavender employees on there. This week's or next week's episode is called The Delightful Sale. So Grayson Hogard from the Grove Cookie Company is coming in. We are going to go deep on how to create a delightful buying experience for your prospects. So if you want to scan that barcode up there, you can RSVP to the event. You can also check me out at chrisbogue.io. That is where I sell my website, The Complete Guide to Selling on Video. That is my course, is my deep dive on video prospecting. Or you could also just connect with me. Look me up on LinkedIn. Just Chris Bogue. I am friendly. I connect with almost everybody. So yeah, go in there, jump in there, reach out to me, check out the show, and don't be a stranger. I'm a chatty Cathy.
You are definitely friendly. You're friendly and you're nice and you're smart. Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you for being with us today. Everybody who's watching, thank you for being with us. Remember, we will have this show. If you want to go back and listen to some of Chris's great advice, it is on our YouTube channel at lavender.ai. And be sure to tune in with us every Wednesday because we do this every week. Thank you, Chris, for being with us.